Hey everyone, so good to see you. Thanks for tuning in for another edition of Escaping Rock Bottom, the podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Lee. Thanks for choosing to use iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play to tune in, or even my website, escapingrockbottom.com. For those of you who are watching us right now, you can see I got a special guest for us tonight, and let me tell you, she got a good story for all of us today. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here.
Thank you.
I came back to Phoenix for the week, and you had reached out to me. You're like, listen, I have a really good story for you, so if you've got some time, I would love to share it with you and all of your listeners.
Good. Interesting.
Jennifer, kind of take me back to the very beginning. Where does childhood begin for you? And just kind of take me from there.
Sure. So through the meetings and rooms, I've shared my story a lot, so I kind of have it down pat. I grew up in upstate New York, just 45 minutes out of Manhattan, very affluent area. My father was a police officer in New York. My mother was in healthcare. I was an only child. I had a very nice life, very normal. Attended school in university, SUNY University and Stony Brook University in Long Island. Very basic, normal life. No reason for me to go where I went. Moved out here to Arizona, pursued my dream to become a nurse. And I was a very highly regarded ICU nurse here in Arizona. And I had twins at the time, and I had a hard time working. And my girlfriend said, you should get on some Ritalin. You need Ritalin. It's going to make your life so much better. And I was like, wow, why? Ritalin, ADHD, why? She's like, you're going to lose weight. You're going to work so many shifts. Life's going to be great. So I did. I conned a doctor into getting me on Ritalin. And I was...
Addicts, by the way, very manipulative.
Very manipulative.
We know how to manipulate our way in our bad selves. Like
Absolutely.
Untreated, boy, we're liars, cheaters, thieves, and master manipulators.
100%. And I was 38 years old at the time, mind you. So I had no experience with drugs or the drug world.
Wow.
At all.
That was the first time you really started to experiment with kind of illegal drugs.
Yes. Conning a doctor into giving me Ritalin when I did not have ADHD. But my girlfriend had sold it, and she was another nurse. She was actually a nurse anesthetist. So she was like a CRNA. She worked in the ORs, much more advanced degree, and she sold it to me.
And that's another, I'm totally interrupting you as we go along, fine. But that's another part of the story about addiction that I love to get out there, is that there are people, addiction does not discriminate. There are doctors, anesthesiologists who are drug addicts and drug pushers.
Yeah, there are. So I got on the Ritalin, and well, guess what? The doctor wasn't going to write me a script anymore. It had been a year, and he was like, you really should have learned coping mechanisms by now. And I was like, oh. So I went through withdrawal from not being on Ritalin. It's basically like meth. Yeah, and so I started to, I went to Vegas for a weekend, and again with a bunch of nurses and a couple of respiratory therapists, and we did some coke. And I was like, wow, this is kind of like being on Ritalin.
Yeah, what was that feeling like the first time you did coke? My first time doing cocaine, I was 15. What was your experience like?
I was very annoyed with how quick it went away. And I wanted more and more and more and more and more. And despite the fact that my carotid was pounding, and I was dehydrated, and my pupils were shaky. Despite all that, I still wanted more and more and more. After that weekend of partying, I started confiding in people that I knew that maybe ran in a different circle than I did. You kind of seek out, because here I'm a goody-goody nurse. I have 2 little kids. I'm an ICU nurse. What am I going to want drugs for? That's weird. So I end up finding a girl who was a CNA, and her boyfriend had been in trouble for dealing meth, amphetamine. And I lied, and I said that I knew somebody that wanted to buy a large quantity, but it wasn't for me. And she was like, oh, yeah, I can get you some. So she ended up getting it to me. And then I sat in the parking lot of my hospital, scared that I'm going to drive home with this. I was terrified. But I was under this false delusion, and so this is really genius. I went home, and instead of driving with the meth, but I knew I wanted it for my shift, because when I was on it, I was like super nurse. Give me every patient, ER, ICU, any nurse, I can take every patient. So I went home and, like a genius, put my meth inside an envelope. And then I went ahead and I wrote my address to my hospital and addressed it to me under the guise of a thank you card from a patient. And then I mailed it to myself at the hospital. because I didn't want to transport it in my vehicle. I was scared.
So you mailed the drugs to yourself?
So I mailed it to myself in the hospital, and we all had our little cubby holes. And fortunately, somehow it got through U.S. Postal Service, and I had this big fat rock of meth. And I was under this delusion that I was not like the people that I saw in the ER that we called meth heads, because I'm a professional and I'm just doing a little bit and I'm snorting it and I'm not putting it in my veins and I'm not smoking it and I don't want to lose my teeth. And I had this false delusion that I was better than them. And that quickly changed. People started noticing my behavior was changing. At first, methamphetamine, you're very productive. Very productive.
Okay, so first off, I like to say with meth, there's like two different kinds of meth users. I call them project tweakers. Mm-hmm. So people like you, they're high-functioning addicts. They use meth to give them that jump start throughout the day, to get chores done, to kick ass at work.
Yep.
For me, I was the opposite in that when I did meth, it was sex-driven.
Yeah.
So
P&P.
Yeah. So I was P&P and party and play. Yeah. And so I was a meth sex user. I was never like a meth go to work tweaker. Like, I actually don't know what that would be like, being on the news, being tweaked out and with your eyes. Like, there's just no.
Yeah, you would be very scattered.
So you were like a work tweaker. Like, you would get it to kind of like upstart your day.
At first.
Okay.
Eventually, that one little teeny line that I would do at first was very productive, and I would work a long overnight shift and even stay over to the next day for them. But that quickly changed. Then it was, you have a crash with meth. And then it was a crash where I wasn't answering my phone and my job was calling me. You didn't show up for your shift. And bills weren't getting paid. It was just piling up and piling up and piling up. So I found myself now without a house, without a car.
Wow.
This was within less than 8 months. Started hanging around the shady people that were supplying me the drugs, because to them, I wasn't in a hotel. To them, I had it all. I had a car and a home. So, and I had some money. I wiped out my retirement, my 401k, I cashed that out.
Wow.
And I used everything. So now it's to the point where, what am I going to do? What can I do? So somebody approached me and said, look, I know a guy, and he said that if you just drive a car for him, it started out very simple. If you drive a car from here to here, he's going to pay you $500. And I was
Sounds too good to be true.
It was too good to be true. So it started out actually a little bit more subtle. Let me roll back. It started out with, can you go buy a car on Craigslist? We'll give you the money and you register it in your name.
Oh, that's a red flag.
It should have been.
Right.
It should have been.
But in the depths of our addiction, we're so unable and incapable and unwilling to see that stuff.
Correct. And the gentleman that I met he was in the Sinaloa Cartel. Let me tell you, if you think cartel, you would not think this guy. This guy looked like he would be on Dun and Bradstreet. I'm talking suit. I'm talking very well-spoken, highly educated. This was not like what you think of the cartel like in the TV shows. A guy all tatted up and, kind of with a gun and everything. This guy was very, very well-spoken and very classy, very smart man. So he saw me, and I was put together at this point still. I still looked like a pretty girl, and he felt like he could use that to his advantage and to mine too. So it started out with little things. Get a car for us. We'll give you money. Then it was take the car to Douglas, Arizona. You're going to wait on the side of the road, and 4 people are going to get in the car with you.
What was going through your mind at this stage of the game? You had to have known something wasn't right, but you're like, my goodness, the cash is sitting there in front of you, and you're desperate. You're desperate for money.
I was desperate because at this point, I was still under this delusion that I had lost everything, that if I could just get a big cash infusion, I could fix it all.
Yeah.
I could fix it all. I could fix getting my children back. My ex-husband, fortunately, I'm so grateful to him, had the wherewithal of taking my kids out of my life. So I had this delusion that I could fix it all. And things started to get riskier. It was not just pick up a couple people, which is basically a coyote.
It's exactly what that is.
And drive it. Let me tell you, if you've not been to Douglas, Arizona, if you are a white person and you are in Douglas, Arizona, you're doing 2 things there. You're smuggling people or marijuana. because it is right on the border of Agua Prieta, and you have no business being there. And Border Patrol knows that. Border Patrol knows you're there. And I had a whole story in my head that if I ever got pulled over by Border Patrol, I would say that I was going to like visit a Jerome, and that people ran into my car and took my license and said I had to drive them or I'd be killed. And that was my story. You know, fortunately, by the grace of God, I never got pulled over for that. But later on, not only did I get caught with meth on me, once I was caught with methamphetamine on me, they took my license away. I got put on probation. I was still very much an active addict. I was put in Sheriff Joe's jail for a while. And during that time, I didn't take care of my addiction at all. I was just removed from the drug. But that addiction, you had one episode where somebody said your addiction's doing push-ups on the side.
Yes.
And that's exactly what mine was doing. It was growing and desiring. So I had no desire at all to get clean in any way, shape, or form. I felt like I was Superwoman on these drugs. And in fact, I felt like I could do things better than this cartel boss could. So I was going to sidle up with him and show him all the errors that he does wrong and how I can make it better. Using my background as a nurse, using my background as my father being a police officer, I sidled up with him and I said, look, you're doing it all wrong and I'm going to show you how to fix it. Like I was some entrepreneur in the
cartel world.
In the cartel world.
You're like, listen, cartel, you're doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
Like your business model's not working out for the best for you. Let me fix it.
Yeah, I felt like, I was Kevin O'Leary or, like you're doing this wrong and let me show you how to do this. We're going to take you on the Shark Tank here. So he said, well, let me see you do it first. Let me see you do it. So we went down to somewhere in Tucson, and in the vehicle was like 140 pounds of marijuana. So here I am. I think I'm so smart because you're invincible. You're on marijuana. I mean, you're on meth. So you're so Superwoman.
Yeah, I tell people meth is a drug that can trick, addict, and seduce you into thinking you can do and be anything you want. Superhuman, superpowers when you're high on that drug.
If you know the history of methamphetamine, it's actually what the Japanese kamikaze pilots in its purest form would take a shot of. I used to think it was sake, like let's do a shot of sake and blow ourselves up. No, they would do a shot of meth, knowing they were going to go commit suicide.
Yeah.
So it does give you that superhuman power. So unfortunately for me being so smart, while I was driving this minuscule load of 140 pounds of marijuana, a larger load of about 1,000 pounds was allowed to go through. So they had called the police on me and said, this girl's driving a car and has marijuana. So that was in Pima County. And I was put in jail for 19 months down there and released on probation by the grace of God. Fortunately, I don't even know how that happened because I think it's because Tucson sees so much in that sector. They were like 440 pounds, just give her probation.
It's probably true.
Probably. It's such a tiny amount compared
to other stuff that's being smuggled
Correct. And it's relatively harmless in comparison to heroin or fentanyl. So they kind of gave me a slap on the hands. So I kept getting these chances. And I was so good and manipulative. I would get these young probation officers, and I was just so manipulative, males, until they gave me a female one time. And then that was it. My BSing, my looking pretty, my paying my fines on time, my showing up for my appointments on time did not erase all of the dirty UAs that I had. When I got this female probation officer, she saw right through me. I could not manipulate her in any way, shape, or form.
Probably was a blessing.
It was a blessing. I hated her, but it was a blessing. It was a blessing. So she was like, you need to go to rehab. You need to go to rehab. You're now on 3 probations in 2 different counties. You've lost your nursing license and you need to go to rehab. And I was like, how long? And she's like, as long as it takes. And I'm like, well, I want the shortest one possible because I want to go back out and be able to use meth because I'm going to do it right this time. I'm not going to hang around the hotels. I'm not going to hang around motels. I'm not going to let people borrow my car. I'm going to just do it by myself and live my normal life the way I used to in my head. So I find a rehab here in the Valley that only takes women. That was one of her caveats, is you only female only rehab.
Correct.
You have no business being around men. You know, that's your weakness as well. So you shouldn't do it. So I go into this 30-day program, and probably about 2 weeks into not wanting to be there and finding every trick in the book, like when I heard relapse is a part of recovery, I was like, whoa, yes. These people expect me to relapse. They expect me to relapse, and it's going to be okay. Because they said relapse is a part of recovery. I heard it.
Wow. So, and you know what I tell people? I've been sober for nearly a decade and I've never relapsed. And I make it a point to tell every time I travel now the country and I share my story and I speak, I always tell people relapse does not have to be part of your story.
That is 100%. So I, as the cunning, manipulative addict, I was like, relapse.
Hey, you held on to that.
Is a part of recovery. So they expect me to relapse, and it's going to be okay. They're going to give me a pat on the back, take a new chip, you're fine, start over. My sponsor was like, not today, not in your story. It means you're going to see it in the rooms.
Correct.
But it does not mean it has to be a part of your recovery.
That's right.
So I was like, oh, damn, gosh, there's no way out of this. You know, and of course you sit in jails and things like that, and you learn like, well, if I would have just drank the baking soda an hour before my test, I wouldn't be here. You try to rationalize so much.
Yeah, especially toward the end of our using.
Yeah.
Because we do, and I tell people this too, we know as addicts toward the very end that our lives have become unmanageable. Mm-hmm. And I tell people, I'm like, listen, we all tried to do it on our own. I was like, no, B, you can't use meth during the week. You can only use it on the weekend, because if you use it during the week, then you're an addict. And I did the same thing. I was like, Brandon, you don't have a problem. You've never bought meth.
Oh,
so as long as I don't buy it and other people will let me use theirs, I'm not an addict because I'm not buying it.
Correct.
And so we try to stop on our own and we try to manage it. And that's really towards the end and showing just how unmanageable that drug is.
Well, and I had that same attitude you did with the method of usage. I just snorted it. I mean, that was such like the princess way of doing it. I didn't use needles. I didn't share. I didn't do any of that. I didn't smoke it. Like, I was not that kind of person. And I will tell you, what's changed my life so much is the humility. Little princess over here got knocked down real quick when I went to rehab, and we had to do dishes. And I was like, I'm paying to be here. Can't you hire somebody to do dishes? Like, this is ridiculous. Why am I doing dishes?
Hello, ego.
Yeah, I'm 40 years old. I know how to do dishes, or however old I was, then. I know how to do dishes. Like, I mean, come on. Like, I have a bachelor's degree. Like, really? And then they had these counselors there, and I picked on the counselors. I'm like, do you even have any education? You know, because I was so haughty and egotistical, and I had no humility and no humbleness. I still thought I was just the queen bee. So through prayer, through going through the rehab process, after 2 weeks there, I was like, you know what? I actually feel the effect of coffee now, which is odd. I hadn't felt the effects of coffee in so long.
Isn't that incredible?
Because my body was so polluted with battery acid or whatever it was that I had. And during that time, I started about 4 weeks into it. I was like, you know what? I don't need a drug anymore. I cannot believe now I have to pick up my life. How am I going to pick it up? People my age are like finishing paying off their mortgage. Their 401ks are filled up. You know, they have teenagers. Like, what am I going to do? My life has basically, I'm behind the 8 ball now. So then my addiction kicked in to catch myself up to the normies. And I realized that I'm always an addict, even though it's things that you or society may see as a very good positive thing, like, oh, she's working 3 jobs to get her life back to the way it was. We don't know balance.
We don't.
We're extremists. So you're either going to diet and eat and exercise to extreme, or you're going to be, you know, on the couch binge watching Real Housewives. Extremist. Yeah. I need to find balance all the time. So my story was absolutely crazy. I lived with, you know, cartel members. They were all around me.
Well, I got to ask you now, because I know a lot of the people who are listening, they know that you have how many boys or how many kids?
So I have a set of twins, and I also have a 3-year-old little girl.
Okay, so you have 3 children. Mm-hmm. I got to ask you this: like, where you obviously are you a nurse today, and how has that impacted? How is the drug use and all the convictions and all the issues? How has that impacted your career? What are you doing professionally these days? If you can share, feel comfortable
absolutely.
too.
So I had a bachelor's in nursing, and I had a lot of nursing experience, but nobody would hire me. I couldn't even get hired at Walgreens. Nothing. The only thing I could work at was like the phone rooms. You know, when you live in a halfway house, which is where I went, these guys come and ask you to work in these phone rooms. They pay you $150 to cold call people all day. And I was like, I can't do this. Like, these are like shady scammers. I don't want to be a part of this. There's nothing you can do. Your criminal background is terrible. All your background checks fail. What are you going to do? So I did work in the phone rooms for a little bit. I put together a little bit of money, and I was going to go buy a Lexus that I found on Craigslist. So I met the gentleman, and he was a twin as well, and he was an older gentleman. He said, "Do you mind if I ask why you're like 41 years old and you took a bus here and you don't have a car?" And I was like, because I was a meth addict, I was a nurse, I lost everything. And that was the first time that I just openly shared it to somebody that
admitted it outside the rooms.
Yeah, I always tried to cover
outside
for
recovery,
it.
right?
Yeah.
The shame, the stigma that exists.
Can't, my dad
people
was
can't
a cop,
notice this.
I can't know this. Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to present very well. And
what did you say to him? So you told him that, and what did he say?
He said, "Wow." He goes, "I've never met somebody that came out of that." He said, "I've never met somebody that came out of that." So I bought the car from him and his brother, and he said, "I'm very proud of you. I know a lot of guys, and they're all, P&P, they're on Adam for Adam, they're living the party life, poppers, and, meth." And that was my crowd, too. That was like my crowd because I felt safe around them. I knew nobody was going to hurt or harm me.
Right.
So he ended up calling me like 3 weeks later, his twin brother did, who I bought the car, and he said, "My brother wants to know if you want to work for his company. He saw something special in you." And I said, "Well, what does he do?" And he goes, "Well, he owns a flight company that flies critical patients around the world." And I said, "Well, yeah, but I don't have my nursing license anymore." And he goes, "He knows that, but you still have the knowledge."
Wow.
And he likes how you present, and he's proud of you, and he wants you to come work full time.
Okay. I just got goosebumps. Like, I have like goosebumps all over right now because of that. Because you know what that is? That is your higher power.
Yeah, 100%.
That is your higher power leading you to that sale, to get on that bus, to find that Lexus, to find those men. And your higher power did that because you admitted your truth.
Yeah.
You stood in your truth without shame or guilt, and you just said, "This is who I am. This is why I'm here."
And that's the first time I did that, Brandon, because I always tried to cover.
The miracle happened.
Yep. I would apply for jobs and they would pull like a background check.
Yeah.
And I literally would tell them like, "Oh no, I had identity theft a couple of years ago." Now, mind you, I was in recovery, but I was so mortified.
It's the stigma that I'm trying to break or trying to help break.
Honestly, Brandon, I want to go and lobby for people like us, because I will tell you, like, even after my getting clean and staying sober, I went to go look for an apartment and I had to go on a felony friendly list. I went to the one place that they suggested. It was on 15th Avenue in Indian School. And I remember pulling up and the coroner was there. And I was like, "I cannot live here. You're putting me back in the crack house. Like, why? Why? I've proven myself. I'm clean. Don't keep punishing me." And that's what happens to addicts, is that we're triple punished. We have this disease of the mind that affects our body.
Yeah.
When you were running around partying, nobody was taking care of your credit. So why are you shocked that my credit's horrible? And then you have this criminal charges. So you're just double, triple indemnified constantly. And I really wish that I could work to get that stigma taken away for us.
We do that. And I actually had a gentleman from a 12-step room saw me on 3TV this morning, and he was not happy. He was not happy because he said, "I need to go over and reread all the traditions with AA." And you know what I told him? I said, "Listen, I respect you for being in the program." He's an old timer. He's like, "I'm an old timer. I got 30 years. I said, "Listen," I said, "we have a crisis happening in this country right now. And you're right. I'm very knowledgeable of the traditions. And I am calling on all of my sober brothers and sisters to break their anonymity."
Yeah.
Because I saw what happened at the Me Too movement. And all these people felt safe, finally. harboring these secrets.
Demons.
And these demons.
Yeah.
And that Me Too movement allowed people to show their face and share their story and let those demons out without the shame and without the stigma, because strength in numbers. I want the same movement within the addiction world. For those who are strong in our recovery and stand in our truth, let's break our anonymity. Let's put a face to the disease. And the more of us working professionals that do that will make it easier and we'll lay the pathwork and the foundation for those coming up behind us.
The owner of my company, within 5 years of me working there, promoted me to director of sales and then VP of sales.
Congratulations.
And
the miracles.
He told me I would hire 10 more of you because I'm so grateful for the position, and I take it and I cherish it every day.
And I tell people, addicts who are in recovery, and we're working, recovered addicts in recovery.
Recovered addicts.
And I don't call myself an addict anymore.
Me
it's
either.
Another thing that people push back in the program. They're like, no, you're an addict, always an addict.
You are what you say, and thoughts become things, and words become things.
And my therapist taught me that.
Yeah, if you say I'm an addict every day, guess what? You're an addict. I say I'm recovering or I'm recovered.
Yes, and I tell people I'm a recovered addict, with a decade of experience now that I get to share with other people. But when I tell people, I'm like, listen, at our worst, we're liars, cheaters, manipulators, and thieves. Mm-hmm. At our best in recovery, we are some of the strongest, finest, honest, hardworking people
100%.
You can have in your company.
100%. But we need to get it out there. People need to see our faces. Business owners need to see. I applaud Mod Pizza. They're local here in the Valley. They will hire felons all day. The owner says it. If you're a felon, come work for me. I'll hire you all day. Companies like that really make a difference.
So can I ask you, how is your relationship with your kids?
So after many court battles and having to prove myself, hair follicle tests and everything, I now have full custody of my children again.
Congratulations.
And they're in my life. I hope they learn from my mistakes. I was the goody two-shoes and perfect person. And I will tell you just one last note. This is the most important thing to recovery to me. When you're an addict and you make your whatever program you're following, NA, CA, AA, whatever, you're going to make an inventory list at some point.
Correct.
You're going to put down everybody you wronged and those who wronged you, etc. I need everybody to put themselves down. That was the hardest person to forgive, was myself.
God, that's so good.
You have to forgive yourself. You have a disease. I don't put down diabetics because they crave sugar and they may over-abuse it and lose a leg because their pancreas is broken.
Right.
I had to forgive myself. Once, that was the hardest thing because I felt like I was saying, you're giving yourself permission for what you did to your children and your family. But once I forgave myself and I let it go, I literally wrote it on a piece of paper to God and I crumbled it up and I threw it away and I never take it back. It's with him. It's not with me. I finally blossomed and grew into this person. I wasn't carrying around that chain of guilt.
We like to say there's an exercise called drop the rock. It's very similar, right? We drop that dead weight
it's done.
To allow us to be free.
Right, and you're never going to pick it back up again. And when you think you're gonna, I need you to remember that you gave it over to somebody bigger and badder than you.
I love that. I'm so friggin' glad that you reached out to me on social media because that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
And I told that gentleman who wrote me that email this morning who was upset with me, and I said, listen, I started a podcast in order to reach people who will never find the rooms of recovery. There are 23 million Americans who are identified as addicts.
Correct.
Only 3 million of that 23 will ever go to a 12-step program, will ever go to rehab. That leaves 20 million other Americans who are helpless and hopeless. Multiply that by 5. Mm-hmm. They've got a mom, a dad, a brother, and sister, or kids who are also deeply impacted by this. And this podcast is for those people. So on their way to work, they happen to hear a message of hope. Yeah. That people can see that you and I, how far down the scale we had fallen.
Literally.
And look at the miracles that our higher powers have brought us when we decided to rewire our brains and make a change. Yeah. So I want to say thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for sharing your story. And I know everyone out there is going to be able to learn something from this. And I got to give you a hug.
Oh, thank you.
I think it's incredible. And keep speaking your truth. Keep speaking your truth. You have an incredible story. And we get the chance to save lives.
Every day.
And I tell people, news is my passion. I love the news business. My purpose is to help others get clean.
You're doing a phenomenal job.
We do
thank
that.
You.
So thank you. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of Escaping Rock Bottom. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and also my website, escapingrockbottom.com. We'll see you back here for another episode next week.